going to win 4 more years in the White House.
This is peace in the Middle East without blood all over the sand.
I trust vaccines, I trust scientists, but I don't trust Donald Trump.
Welcome to WION VOA co-production, our special weekly presentation, bringing you a comprehensive coverage on US election 2020. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Now, with less than 2 months for the US presidential election, President Donald Trump hosted the signing of the Abraham Accords on Tuesday, a deal that normalizes Israel's relations with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Experts say the accords signify a shift away from the decades-long regional strategy that, in exchange for diplomatic recognition, Israel must provide concessions to the two-state solution towards an independent Palestinian state. Voice of America's White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara brings you this story.
President Donald Trump said he is marking the dawn of a new Middle East as foreign ministers from the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain joined Israel's prime minister at the White House Tuesday to sign the Abraham Accords, normalizing the two Gulf Arab states with Israel.
In Israel's entire history, there have previously been only 2 such agreements. Now we have achieved 2 in a single month, and there are more to follow.
The agreements are part of a broader diplomatic effort by the Trump administration to pressure Palestinians into accepting a peace deal, a strategy that experts call the outside-in approach.
And that is, if everybody recognizes Israel in its current borders, in its de facto control over all of Jerusalem, over the West Bank, and even the Gaza Strip, that would eventually force Palestinians essentially to acquiesce and leave them no choice, really, but to surrender to this reality on the ground.
You could say it's a back door, but I call it a smart door, not a back door.
Analysts say the agreement between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel reflect a changing regional calculation on the two-state solution.
This is really a consolidation of some of the geopolitical shifts that we've been seeing that have been coming for decades, but that show that Arab Gulf states and Israel have more in common in terms of their opposition to Iran than they have in opposition in relation to their views on Palestinian aspirations for statehood.
Less than 2 months before the U.S. election, the Trump administration is touting the Abraham Accords as a foreign policy win. And while foreign policy may not rank as high of an election issue compared to the pandemic and the economy, the future of Israel matters to a key group of Trump supporters, evangelical Christians, who Pew data reports made up about a third of the president's supporters during the 2016 race. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
So what will be the impact of this deal on the US election? Let's get in an analysis by Voice of America's Nova Purwadi, who joins me live from Washington, D.C. at this hour. Hey, Nova, I hope you're doing great. And thank you for joining this broadcast. Now, Nova, how important is the issue of Middle East peace for the US voter? Is it important at all?
Well, Middle East peace and also the conflict, a long-running conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians is an issue that stirs strong emotions among some circles in many, many countries. I believe even India supports the peace deal offered by President Trump, the Trump administration, the two-pronged peace deal that focuses on the economy and also on the political and security aspects of Middle Eastern peace. And in the U.S., you could say that the U.S. voters are predominantly pro-Israel. The latest Gallup poll asking voters whether they were more pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian showed that around 60% of U.S. voters are more pro-Israel, whereas the number that describe themselves as more pro-Palestinian is around 25%. Now, as for the deal itself, it is receiving a majority support among voters. 54% of those polled in a recent YouGov and The Economist poll say they support the deal between the UAE, Bahrain, to normalize relations with Israel. Now, if you break that down along partisan lines, more Republicans support it than Democrats. You have 62% of Republicans supporting it, but it's also a majority of Democrats supporting it, around 53%. Now, the issue of Middle East peace is also a preoccupation of successive U.S. administrations, and each president has tried in one way or another to influence and to broker Middle East peace with varying degrees of success. Under Jimmy Carter's administration, you had the deal with Egypt that normalized relations with Israel in 1979, and under President Bill Clinton, you also had the deal that normalized relations with Jordan in 1994. In fact, that was the last time an Arab country normalized relations with Israel. So this is something that the Trump administration can tout as one of its successes.
Right.
Now, whether this translates to electoral gain remains to be seen. We'll have to see whether the polls indicate a shift, Akansha.
That's precisely what I'm going to come to next, Nova. It's very interesting, actually. Is this deal and foreign policy in general likely to sway the American voters one way or the other?
Well, the UAE-Bahrain-Israel Accord does add something that President Trump can, as an incumbent, can point to his accomplishments. Certainly, everyone can agree that President Trump's foreign policy is rather unconventional in its approach. But due to its unconventional nature, we've seen several surprises, including his overtures with North Korea. President Trump went from Rocket Man and Fire and Fury to having 3 summits with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. So these are some of the breakthroughs that President Trump, as an incumbent, can tout as his achievements. Now, whether that will sway voters or not remains to be seen. There's also a difference in approach with Democrats. Democrats feel his overtures to Kim Jong-un and also to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and also to Russia are pretty much coddling or cozying up to dictators, is the word that Joe Biden, the presidential candidate for the Democrats, and also Kamala Harris, his running mate, seem to accuse President Trump of being. And even European nations, leaders of European nations, often consider him to be harsher on allies than he is with normally adversaries like Iran or North Korea. So these are some of the controversies, and whether this swings the pendulum one way or another, a recent Pew Research poll showed the divergence of priorities between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans, their top 2 priorities are the economy and violent crime, whereas Democrats are healthcare and the coronavirus. For both groups, though, they consider foreign policy very low. So very low on the ladder. So sixth ranking of priorities. So it's not likely a game changer, but breakthroughs like the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel deal, the Abraham Accords, certainly don't hurt an incumbent president.
Certainly, Nova. It is indeed a breakthrough on the international stage, but we'll have to wait and watch to see if that foreign policy gain actually, how that translates into the domestic arena.